All right. Thank you for joining us this morning for the Oregon State Board of Agriculture meeting. This is Wednesday, May 4th, 2022. This is Brian Harper, Chair of the Board. This meeting is now called to order. First time. Oh man, that's cool. Yep. I'd like to begin by asking Department of Agriculture Board Coordinator Carla Valnes to review a few housekeeping items for the meeting.
Good morning, Carla Valnes. We'd like to remind folks to please keep your phones on mute. If you're joining us online, to also keep your computer on mute. And also online, folks, if you would keep your camera off until you have a comment or are making a presentation. And if you are joining us remotely or in the audience here and would like to see some of the materials that have been posted on our website, the address is https://odadirect.boardagriculture. Sorry, oda.direct/boardagriculture. And just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, Carla. Now, Carla, will you please call roll for introductions?
You bet. Brian Harper.
Yeah, Brian Harper, farmer, Junction City, Oregon.
Chad Allen was going to join us remotely. I don't know if he's online yet or not. I don't see him online yet. Barbara Boyer.
Barbara Boyer. I have the pleasure of sitting here today as the chair of the Soil and Water Conservation Commission.
Shante Johnson is excused from the meeting. Miguel Lopez.
Miguel Lopez, Mayor Manager here in the Willamette Valley. And public member.
Elin Miller.
Yeah, Elin Miller, Umpqua, hazelnut grower and wine grape grower.
Eric Oram.
Eric Oram, farmer rancher in Morrow County.
Luisa Santa Maria.
Luisa Santa Maria, public member at Oregon State University Extension.
Randy Svati.
Farmer in Ontario, Oregon.
Josh Zelensky is excused. Dean Simonich.
Dean Stacy Simonich, new dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences at Oregon State University.
Director Taylor.
Alexis Taylor, Director, ODA.
Thank you. We'll go around the room and do introductions, and I'd also like to remind you to sign in on the table. There's a sign-in sheet. The white sheet is for public attendance, and the green sheet is if you'd like to make public comment today. So we'll go around the room quickly. Lauren, why don't you start?
Lauren Henderson, Deputy Director of the Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Sandow, Assistant Director of the Department of Agriculture.
Andrea Cantu-Chauvas, Communications Director for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And just warning because I will be buzzing around taking things. If anyone in the audience would have a copy photograph, please let me know, and I will respect that.
Jess Paulson, Program Director for the Market Access and Certification Programs.
Taylor Sarman here today on behalf of Friends of Family Farmers.
I'm Katie Murray, Executive Director of Oregon.
Isaac Stapleton, Natural Resources Program Director for Department of Ag.
Lucia Rodriguez, Executive Assistant for the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I'm Arcan Allen, Farm Quality Program Manager for ODA, and I'd like to give special recognition to Karen Stutzman today. She is our brand new Soil and Water Conservation System Program lead. So Claire Wagner, Government Affairs Associate, Oregon Farm Bureau.
Bill Miller, hazelnut grower down in Umpqua, come to my wife, meeting.
Rusty Rock, Program Director for the Food Safety, Animal Health, and Lab Services at ODA.
Excuse me, Jim Johnson, Land Use and Water Planning Coordinator, Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Let's see if this will work. We'll do online introductions quickly. Tammy Kerr.
Good morning, Tammy Kerr, Oregon Dairy Farmers Association.
I hear her somewhere.
It's really faint.
Yeah.
That's really quiet.
Tammy, you want to try that again?
I have my volume up. Tammy Kerr, Oregon Dairy Farmers Association.
Perfect.
Is that better?
Thank you. Yep. Tracy Lowe.
Tracy Lowe, Statesman Journal.
Thank you. Stuart Wrights.
Stuart Wrights, Oregon State University.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carla. I want to note that public comment is scheduled for 10:30 this morning. We have received 2 written public comments, and we have we have 1 request to make verbal comments at today's meeting. If you would like to sign up this morning to provide verbal comments in person, please sign up using the sheet on the table prior to comment period. If you are joining us, joining this meeting online, please make a request in the chat box, including your name and organization. Comment time will be limited to just 3 minutes. 3 minutes. I want to say that again. Now, agenda item 2, I want to welcome Dean Simonich. All right, to the board this morning, and we'll give you some additional time on the agenda this morning to introduce yourself and share some news with the college.
Great. Well, thank you all. I'm excited to be here and to be ex officio on the board. Earlier this year, former Dean Alan Sams decided to return to a vice president position at Texas A&M. And, I've been at Oregon State for over about 21 years coming up, and always in the college for those 21 years, even though I've had various administrative positions around the college. And I was the number 2 for a number of years in the college as executive associate dean, and had great support from faculty, staff, students, and some of the stakeholders and donors. And I find myself in this great honor to be the first female dean of our college and to represent our college in this great state. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin. You might hear that in my voice on occasion. Yes, I like cheese, beer, and the Packers, but I like Beaver football more. Anyway, I didn't grow up on a farm, but my grandfather had a small farm that I was with him on the weekends and visited friends with dairy farms. My father worked in a paper mill. I was the first in my immediate family to attend college, first at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and then later for my PhD at Indiana University. And then after that, working for the Procter & Gamble company, P&G in Cincinnati for 6 years before taking a huge pay cut and coming to Oregon, never looking back and starting over as an assistant professor. So I have a lot of background and passion for our state, the agricultural and natural resources industry in our state, and all the people we represent, that broad spectrum, and a passion for science and people and business, because I also have my OSU MBA. Just to remind you a little bit about our college, one of the founding colleges of Oregon State University in 1868. We're really seeing a large growth in research expenditures and the research dollars we're bringing in. In fact, we expect to have a new record this coming year, and about 55% of that is federal dollars. Everything from USDA to the National Science Foundation to National Institutes of Health to Department of Energy, Department of Defense. So really a broad college representing all of agriculture and a large portion of the natural resources on the OSU campus. So about $1 million now for scholarships, 3,300 students across the world, really, because we are, I would say, a leading college in areas involving eCampus, and a real market for that for students who maybe don't have the privilege, finances to come to Corvallis to learn. They're learning agriculture from us via eCampus. We have about 1,000 employees, statewide, one of them in this room, one of them online, and so thankful to them for the great work they do across our state. And we're embedded in 36 counties through extension, and we have 14 experiment stations across the state. That's a large number. If you look at, let's say, Washington State, there's maybe 3 or 4 there. So really recognizing the diversity of agriculture and climatic zones, agri-zones across the state, and trying to meet the needs across, everywhere from Astoria and Newport to Ontario. So we've defined 4 areas of focus within our college that we really have strengths in. We call them our strategic advantages. One is coastal food systems and conservation. Another is food innovation for health, markets, and access. The third is agricultural competitiveness and resilience. And the fourth is working in natural landscapes. So those are kind of our key strengths, 4 key strengths in our college. And as you can imagine, given the broad array of our college from agriculture to natural resources, we're really at that point where we're trying to balance, demanding economies, delicate ecosystems, cultivate mindful stewardship of our resources. At the same time, we can have good livelihoods for the people of our state. So our mission is really to make tomorrow better for everyone. It used to be make tomorrow better. I've added for everyone. So I think since coming into this position a month and a half ago and going through the interview process, I want to tell you a little bit about my priorities as dean. It's really that both the dean, myself, and the college to get back out there, right? We had COVID, we had prior deans that had limitations to get back out there, but that's my passion. I love that. And if you follow me on social media, invite anyone to, that I'm out there. And it's not just the dean has to get back out there. It's everyone in the college. And so some of the highlights recently, we've partnered with ODA on the Oregon Agricultural Food and Fiber Economics Analysis last fall. I think that was very helpful. It's important, of course, that we work together in terms of the number of jobs we provide in the state, the impact on the economy of the state, and even, the nation. Our huge growing exports, our really strong global reach, which I just hope to even grow both for the college and for the state. So just to give you some of the highlights of me being out there since I became dean last month, here are some of the things that I've been out doing and showing the faculty, staff, et cetera, what I'm doing and how they also need to get out there and really listen, understand the needs, and respond to those needs. So, I regularly participate in either local farmers, combinations, single farmers, touring of their agricultural fields and partners, and that all the systems involving that. Had meetings with Northwest Farm Credit Services and our great partnership there, meetings with folks in Oregonians for food and shelter, including the board, meetings with folks from the Oregon Farm Bureau, and hope to have much more of that. Meeting with the board for, the Oregon Wheat Commission, including Amanda Hoey, CEO, meeting with the board of the Wheat Marketing Center in Portland, meeting with Brian Osland, Executive Director, Oregon Commodity Commission's Blueberry, Fine Fescue, Clover Mint, Rye, and others. Also other directors. I hope to be meeting with every director of an Oregon Commodity Commission, looking forward to meeting in person with them. The Ag Research Foundation Spring Board meeting. A great highlight was the Diamond Pioneer Luncheon just a few weeks ago, and there's been a few pictures of that, inducting both 2020 and 2021 Diamond Pioneers, those great folks across the state who've contributed a lifetime to agriculture and natural resources for the state and for OSU. Oregon Women for Agriculture auction and dinner. What a great time. And then most recently something new, Sustainable Food and Manufacturing Forum that we had the first of at OSU, about 70 people from across the state attending that. And then one last one, Oregon Grape Day just recently. So it's been busy. It's going to be busy. I want it to be busy, and I want our folks to be busy out there listening, understanding, and helping to solve problems. So I'm looking forward to this meeting and learning more from all of you and continuing to build our strong and important relationship between Oregon agriculture and our great college. So thank you.
Thank you, Dean Simonich. Are there any questions from the board in person here or from our virtual participants on the board? All right. Well, you're going to have to excuse me. I think after almost 6 years, I'd have this figured out. But I jumped down the agenda item list here. We need to go back to approved minutes.
That's okay.
So,
Elin Miller, move to approve.
all right. We have a
Barbara Boyer, second.
first and second. Is there any discussion? All right. Seeing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can't we raise our hands?
Yeah. Aye. All right. Motion passes. Now we'll move on to the director's report.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back in person for, I think, one of the first, if not the first, in-person board meetings around the state. So that's very exciting. Dean Simonich, thank you for that introduction of yourself and your priorities. And I just wanted to say, you know, OSU has been a great partner, and we are really excited to continue that partnership under your leadership. And welcome from one Midwesterner to another. Oregonians are very welcoming to us. And you mentioned you're the first woman, but what's always exciting about being the first woman in a role is you're not the last. And, you know, my predecessor really paved the way for me to be able to step into this role. So welcome, and we're really excited to have you on our board and in Oregon in this role. So I just had a couple things that I wanted to cover and highlight specifically for the board today. One is you've seen a lot of new people probably, and some for the first time or some for the first time in their new roles. We have a lot of new faces around ODA. We've been doing a lot of hiring, and some of them, you know, after 2 years working remotely primarily, we're all getting to know each other as well. A couple that I specifically wanted to just call out. I've just appointed Jonathan Sandow from senior advisor in my office to assistant director. I'm thrilled to have Jonathan in this role. He has just shown tremendous leadership over the past 2 years through multitude of natural disasters, obviously the COVID pandemic, and he's going to be a great partner. So we're really excited for him to step into that role. Rusty Rock, we recently promoted into the program area director for the food safety and animal health programs. You may think that he's not a new face in that role. He was interim acting for about 8 months, but he was. We went through an interview process and selected Rusty to fill that role, and he's done a great job for us and will continue to. And then I also wanted to mention we have a new hire who mentioned or introduced herself in the round robin, but Lucia, sorry, I'm going to mix up Luisa and Lucia. Lucia Rodriguez, she is filling, she's come to us to fill Donna's role as executive director in the director's office, and she has just been a great addition to our team, and we're so excited to have her on. So some new faces for you that I wanted to specifically mention, but the hiring frenzy and recruitment frenzy does continue at ODA, and that's a really exciting opportunity, I think, as you've seen to bring people in new to our agency, but also have some promotions internally and growth opportunities. The state reopened to the public on Monday. We've always been open, but our buildings officially reopened on Monday. And things have changed at ODA. I just wanted to mention for all of you, the access to our building is going to be different than it historically has. We've gone to a more controlled access building. For a long time, we were maybe one of the only state buildings on the Capitol Mall that was not controlled access. For security reasons, listening to concerns from staff, we have gone to controlled access. So now we have a check-in window where visitors and guests who have business or meetings at ODA are going to have to check into and then be escorted up to whatever program they're meeting with or have business with to conduct that business. So it'll look a little different. I think the first day, at least by early afternoon when I checked in, we had 15 people already check into that window. So, which I think is great. So just a little bit of a FYI, when you come to ODA, it may look a little different and feel a little different. But hopefully that customer service is the same. We are also, I think, figuring out what our new footprint looks like as we are moving towards, a lot of employees are moving towards a hybrid model. Some people will be working and have worked, honestly, through the pandemic, 100% in the building. We have a lot of laboratory space. You can't do those highly precise scientific methods at home. But really figuring out how do we continue to service our customers who are coming into the building and provide that some flexibility for our employees. I think probably what it looks like today in that hybrid model, in a year it'll probably look different as employees figure out what they really want, as we assess really what our needs are as a business. But we are in that mode of a hybrid workforce, and will continue to be going forward, particularly as we're going through recruitment and hiring. That's a big demand of people coming in from the workforce. And so we're able to provide some of that flexibility, but that business need of our customers are first and foremost on our mind. A couple of other things I just wanted to highlight, and some of this was in some of the program reports, but I wanted to call it out specifically because I know it's been priority of interest for the board. Through the 21 session, we got a couple different funding grant streams than what we've had in the past. One is around meat capacity. The board may remember that we received a $2 million to award to expand infrastructure and capacity for meat slaughter and processing in the state. We are in the middle of, the grant cycle has closed and we received 44 applications, and they requested $14.5 million in funding for a little $2 million. So that's really exciting. I think that shows there's a lot of demand out there. There's a lot of interest from the livestock and meat and processing side of things. And so we are working through the review of those applications now and are excited to make some selections later this month. At the same time, we have a letter that we have submitted to the E-Board, the emergency board, for their June meeting to increase, to request another $2 million. So we will take that program to $4 million. And so we're really excited about that as well. The other grant that I wanted to mention that I know has been of interest is the Noxious weed grants. In our 21 budget, we received $450,000 to do some additional granting out on the countryside. And we just sat down, we did a call for applications. We just sat down and reviewed the applications we received, and we're going to be funding 18 grants in all corners of the state. I think there's some really great projects, and we're really excited about some of the expanded capacity in the counties that we're able to fund. One of the things that we did allow in this granting cycle is to for applicants to request up to $20,000 of equipment. And we saw a lot of equipment requests. I think that equipment had to be tied to a project to be able to expand their reach of those noxious weed projects. But what we saw is there was a big need out there. So that's really exciting because it will also improve their capacity overall to be and expand their reach. So that's great. We are going to be developing just a summary report for the board, which we will be sharing of, where those grants are, kind of what we were funding. But I think it was a really exciting opportunity for a lot of these really small weed projects that and be able to kind of target some unique things that they hadn't been able to fund in the past. So, Chair Harper, that is my report, unless there are any questions.
Barbara Boyer. So I'm really pleased that ODA is now a little more secure for the staff. What does it look like when our board meetings are in the basement?
Yeah, It will be the same, I believe. You know, I think what we will have is probably just some staff staged at the doors to help that flow and help the check-in process. People do have to get a visitor's badge, but all of those will continue. But I think we will just staff it a little differently so people aren't just queuing up in the lobby.
Any other questions for Director Taylor? And of course, our virtual members as well that are participating. Any questions? All right. Well, next we'll be hearing from our Deputy Director, Lauren Henderson, on the ODA's budget and legislative update.
Good morning, everyone, and I echo all of you. It's great to be in person. Dean, it's nice to meet you finally. I think I was just sitting there thinking, I think this is my 12th biennial budget at the Department of Ag. That doesn't include my prior, and I'll just tell you, before Jonathan and I go through this list, every budget's the same as we prepare for them, but it's also very different. One thing that is the same is we're constantly trying to keep what we have. And I would say that that is the case with the budget that we're going to go through very quickly for you. Mostly the natural resource agencies are continually having capacity issues. This budget is meant to kind of fix some of those. I think we made a lot of gains this last budget period in a time where I thought it was going to be pretty drastic cuts. That did not happen, luckily. And so we're going to go through this really quickly. I will just say this is really the start of a very long and complicated process. What you see in front of you is very draft. It's really top of the head with our program directors and our staff about where we think our needs are. It will change. And we will make sure that we try to keep you up to speed as it changes and gets more finalized. The numbers that are on it, some places have good numbers, some places do not. Really, after this meeting, we will be spending the month of May to really get to that next level, which is more defined in what we're asking for and really vetting, I think, internally, is this really a doable package or not? And is it something that we need to continue to move forward? The budget is due to the governor in September 1st. We have a lot of work to do between now and then. I feel like we're a little behind already, but we're really not. It's just me being paranoid. And then the second thing is we met with a large group of stakeholders Friday. That meeting went very well, and anticipate we'll getting more input on that. But one of the things that was asked that I thought was good to point out today, which is, are you communicating to the other agencies about what you're asking for and what they're asking for? And the answer is not yet. But that will happen. It will also happen through the governor's natural resource office. They will be working with the agency directors on comparative asks. We do have a few here that could be complementary to what other agencies are doing, and we'll work through that. That doesn't mean that there won't be some packages that may look the same, but we'll try to make sure that we're at least talking in what we're asking for so that we're trying not to be in conflict with what we're doing. So with that, I'm going to let new Assistant Director Sandow, which I'm delighted to have, work through the list, and I will work through the North Valley one as you go through it.
Well, good morning, Chair Harper, Director Taylor, members of the board, Jonathan Sandow. As Lauren mentioned, our Friday meeting with stakeholders went about 90 minutes, and so I will take gentle reminders from the chair on time where we are at. But I'm going to start at the top here and go through the ledge concepts, and then we'll move through the policy packages pretty quickly as well.
And Jonathan, I'm sorry to interrupt. This is in tab 3 of the board book.
It's also on the screen. It should be shared with the virtual folks. So just, I think, a quick overview for folks who might not be familiar with the legislative concept process and or through the agency. Agencies on the odd number years have an opportunity to put legislative concepts forward through the governor's office. Ultimately, the governor introduces all the agency concepts. And that process for agencies start pretty early in this year, and we had to submit everything by April 15th. So that was kind of the agency deadline to put all their concepts forward. Then they get worked through both the governor's office and other policy advisors to work through them, and then we wrap up that process about October when the legislators start working on all their concepts. And so we're pretty well finalized by then. So you'll see we have 5 here. 3 of them are what we call placeholders. That's what that little PH stands for. But the first one there is on behalf of the Oregon Invasive Species Council. That is a council created kind of in with ODA. They don't have the ability to buy risk management insurance through DAS like a lot of other boards and commissions do. And so this is putting some pretty narrow language just right in their statutes that would allow them to be able to buy that insurance through DAS. The second ledge concept is really pretty straightforward. The EPA in 2020 did a streamlining of the Clean Airs Act. We reference some volatility standards for fuel by reference in our statutes, citing a CFR code. That CFR got renumbered. So the one that's in our statutes doesn't point back to the standards that we need it to. And so we're just changing that reference back to, or updating that reference to what they did in 2020. So those are the 2 ledge concepts that we are currently working to get drafted. They're in the process going. The next 3 are really placeholders. We have until June 1st to decide if we're going to develop them or not. And the first one there is around animal rescue entities. In 2019, the legislature moved the authority from counties to our state vet to register animal rescue entities. So, think county shelters, humane, those types of facilities. This is going to complement a budget ask. Either there's going to need to be policy changes, or we're going to need some general fund to kind of backfill that program, because it was designed to be an other fund / fee supported program. The way that the policy is actually coming into reality, it's not being supported 100% by those fees. And so this is either going to be some policy, which this placeholder exists for, or for some budget changes. The next one is a pesticide registrar fee increase. We have statutory caps on the fee that we can assess for pesticide registrants. We are working through rule to see where we're going to go up to that cap. This is a placeholder to potentially raise that statutory cap should we need it. It's a placeholder to give us more time to work through that process. And then the 5th one is for livestock the identification program or brands. And this was really a placeholder put in there as we were kind of working through some more of that budget work to figure out, are there some program changes that would need to be made to kind of match where we're at on that budget. And so, again, all 3 of these are placeholders to give us just more time to work through them because, that deadline was April 15th. So I'll stop there with the ledge concepts, see if the board members have any questions, and we can certainly keep talking as we move through this whole process too.
Any questions from the board or online participants as well from the board?
Elin Miller, just a question again as a new board member process-wise. So if the board was interested in talking to the department about legislation, what's the best timing? It sounds like that April 15th date is gone for you to have any concept in at all. Is it 2 years from now then, or is it something we can say, hey, did you consider, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the next process would be in 2 years, and definitely, we brought it up in the January board meeting. I think we talked about the process, and so we can be a bit more explicit, I think, maybe next time around, but it would definitely be well before that April 15th.
Alexis Taylor, I think to have maybe some of the input that you're thinking about and those conversations, we may want to back it up even to that fall board meeting and start there, have another conversation at that January, and then by the time we get to this point, it's either brought forward as an LC or not based upon those discussions.
Right. We'll go to the what are called policy option packages, the budget packages, and Lauren will start with the first one.
So I'm going to have Jonathan go through most of the list, but I wanted to talk through this first one, which is the North Valley Lab Complex. But before I do, I have to be careful not to assume everybody knows what's in my head. So just real briefly, and then maybe at some point I can schedule a kind of a budget 101 for this board, because many of you are new to that process. But just generally this, if we ask for general fund, that comes out of state tax revenues, it's $1 for $1. So in other words, we get $1 in general fund when we can spend $1 in general fund. If it's other funds, we might get the permission to spend that $1, but I have to have the cash to pay for it. The cash does not come with it. And so we get that through our license fees or fee-for-service programs. And so it's just like a business. You have to make sure that those balance at some point in time. And so we're constantly looking at other fund balances and working with our stakeholders and really try to manage those in a way that is prudent. So that's an important. Federal funds is the same way. We get permission to spend $1, but we have to go out and get those grants or those cooperative agreements. The lottery funds is a little bit different. That gets generated through all of those ticket sales and those lottery machines and those forth. That cash actually comes to us and can stay with us. And so it's not guaranteed though. When we went through COVID, we got the lottery dollars permission to spend. The cash had been flowing in through that whole process, but then when they closed all the restaurants, guess what? The cash stopped. And so we had to make some adjustments. And those of you that were with us in that time know that former Deputy Director Hansen and I put the brakes on what we were spending and had to manage it that way. So real briefly, that's what that is. I know I made a very complicated process pretty simple. But the North Valley Lab Complex is something I've talked about before. That is a partnership that we've undertaken with the Department of Administrative Services. They bought a very large building, 185,000 square feet in Wilsonville. It was a former Microsoft property. Microsoft literally just up and left. And so it became a huge and a very good investment for the state to undertake that building. It's undergoing retrofitting right now and will, what I've heard is be the most resilient building that the state owns. It is a beautiful property. As part of that, our lab space is less than desirable in the ODA building. It's not good to have mixed use space with offices and labs. It just doesn't work. It never has worked very well. And then our regulatory lab in the Portland Food Innovation Center, Dean, is really outgrown its space and want to leave that facility, not because we don't like OSU. We love our partnership with OSU and we'll continue that partnership just in a different spot. So I just wanted to make that clear. However, what this POP is we're getting closer to where they will start building that space for ODA. We're going to be the lead tenant in that building and right now have about 80% of the space. It has extra space. We're not filling it completely up, but this will be our biggest investment that we've had probably in general fund in quite some time. It will be in the millions, I would guess, to get our labs moved there. As you can imagine, moving labs is not cheap, but I'm pretty excited about that space. It will actually, I think, set our agency up for the next couple of decades, certainly as far as lab space goes. And we're moving our regulatory lab in Portland, our plant health lab that's in Salem, and our insect pest prevention lab, as well as our animal health lab. So those labs are moving, and we're going to be partnered with OSHA's lab, which is nice. They'll still have their work. We'll have our work. We're not combining our work or roles, but we will share space and maybe even equipment. So if we have a piece of equipment that they need to do something on, we're not double buying pieces of equipment and can share. So I'm really excited about that. You'll see more about that. It will be a large investment as we go forward. All right.
So like we said, we're going to move through these quick. I'm not going to read these word for word. I will gloss over and even skip a few, but that doesn't indicate any sort of prioritization or interest. It's just more in terms of how, potentially new packages or kind of topics that we might want to unpack further. So if I quickly cover one that you want me to go back to, I'm happy to, but that's kind of how I'll move through. So the first one there is, digital infrastructure and security. I think definitely in the kind of that post, COVID hybrid, you see all the cameras, you see this equipment. It's going to take a lot of IT and security to move us into that kind of next realm of hybrid work and building out the capacity to meet the ongoing needs of the customers. Agency equity officer is we're bringing this package back from our last budget. It went through our agency request budget into the governor's budget and didn't go through the legislative budget, and so we're bringing this one back. Same with the emergency management coordinator, the internal auditor, and human resource needs. The community engagement POP is, again, to try to meet that different way to communicate, engage a very diverse group of stakeholders, make sure that the agency is reflective in not only the work that we do, but then how we also communicate that out and bring in that input. The grants coordinating enhancement package, Director Taylor mentioned earlier, we have a lot of new grant opportunities, which is it's a great good thing for both the community and the department, but we do need to bring in some technical staff who write grants. I can tell you, as one who tries to manage some grant reporting for the federal government, I am not a grants writer, so it is a skill set. And then I'm actually just going to keep going through the food safety, then I'll stop there, and then we can kind of talk about them in bigger blocks. The Food Safety Racial Justice Council study. This so in 2021, HB 2167 directed the agencies to kind of incorporate kind of a racial justice study into the budget. And Director Taylor, I think, can unpack this further if there's interest. But as an agency, we looked around to see, or we were selected as one of the agencies to do a pilot version of this before it kind of got fully rolled out. And so we looked around the agency, and the food safety program was the one that made the most sense in terms of really trying to look at, where could we look through our budget to make sure that we had the tools and resources that we were communicating with communities who might be doing different cultural, food practices that weren't necessarily lining up with, the strict food code. And, is that a more of a community engagement, education resources to, look at where the violations were in terms of, the food safety standards that are, obviously high bar that, we want to protect the, make sure that people have, safe food, but were the discrepancies and maybe some of those violations there more related to communication and cultural differences, and is there a better way to implement that? And so that's what that package study is for. State meat inspection program is, we got this authority and money back in 2020 during a special session. This is funds to actually kind of get that up and going, to get some of those inspectors on board as we plan that program to come online here in this year. Avian influenza, limited duration. We already have this position. It's a continuation, but I think in light of the high path AI, it's just more important to keep that position with us. The animal rescue entity one is the parallel conversation to that legislative concept. And then shellfish coordinator is also one that we're bringing back from the 21 budget. So I'll pause there and glad to take any questions from board members.
Barbara.
Barbara Boyer. So on this Food Safety Racial Justice Council, about 4 years ago, wasn't there a specialty crop block grant that kind of studied this? I feel like there was one, and it was more out the Gorge area. It was more focused on an area. I think Shantae, it was an application that she had put in. I'm just curious if there was anything learned from that specialty crop block grant that could help this topic.
So nothing is coming to mind. I mean, we fund a lot of especially crop block grants, looking at to support BIPOC producers. We have done some work around, I think, the growing side, the produce side, to ensure, things are getting translated, outreaches being conducted. We've long supported Adelante Mujeres in Washington County, which supports Latinx female farmers. So we've done a lot of work in this space. I can go back and look at those specialty block grants, but nothing specific is jumping to mind. But I can go back and look and see.
I'll look, but it jumps to my mind. So, because I reviewed that one, so that's why I think I remember it so well. So I'll do the research, but I'll see if it fits in with this.
Yeah, Board Member Boyer, I think what you're thinking about, we did focus on some specific projects. This project, though, is really about how we do our work more than it is specific projects and the engagement that we have there. So that's a little bit of the difference.
All right, not seeing any questions. We'll keep moving. We're on the plant protection and conservation, page 3. The IPPM resourcing, this is really to build in both staff and resource capacity within the IPPM program. I think with the changing kind of the climate, the kind of shifting in USDA priorities, there's a lot that's going to the state in terms of just trying to hold back the invasive pests and species, and so this is to build in capacity to that program to meet the demand of what that program is currently doing today. State noxious weeds, this is that $450,000 that Director Taylor mentioned. It was one-time funding. We're going to ask it to be rolled into the base budget for the department. JB eradication, this is continuation of the funding that we get currently. Hemp IT and staffing, this is potential staffing for the hemp program to continue to implement House Bill 3000, the other policies that have been passed over time, and then also, again, IT support for that program to bring in a lot of management there. Aquatic noxious weeds package, this is a carryover from our 21 budget that was in our agency budget, and then apiary health is a new position ask, really for the ODA to complement the OSU Oregon Bee Project and the work that we do with them. And then into the natural resource program area, pesticide staff, this is some additional staff to implement kind of the new federal CNT, the certification and training requirements. We have a lot of products that came in for registration during COVID for disinfectants, things of that nature that really was part of the registration process. So additional staff and capacity there. Cannabis staff, we have 2 positions that are funded through an LLCC transfer through the cannabis funding. So that's that package exists to continue those. We have a soil health position. We actually have this position. It was in our budget last year, and then NRCS was able to actually fund that position. And so this one is to either move it to general fund if they don't have that funding anymore, or to continue to accept those federal funds if they are able to do that. I'm going to skip over the Climate Smart Agricultural Grant and come back to that at the end of this list. The Park Fund rebalance. So in the past, the Pesticide Analytical Response Center Park is kind of a multi-agency response center to pesticide cases. In the past, it's really been split 50-50 with other funds, pesticide fees, and then general funds. Right now it's completely on the other funds, the pesticide fee. This pop is to put it back to the kind of that 50-50 between general fund and fees, really to balance kind of the other agencies and the public interest in what the park does. Ag water quality capacity, this package would add 2 new kind of technical assistance folks to the ag water quality. One right now we're thinking, in the riparian aquatic specialist and then a groundwater specialist program. I'll say out of our Friday stakeholder meeting, this one was mentioned to try to do some more cross communication with other agencies that have different asks. I've done that. We've started the conversations with OWRD, DEQ, and some other agencies that have water asks, and so those are starting now. And then the La Guama funding, we got $250,000 in the last budget for this work, and the contract's going to exceed the biennium, and it's general fund, so you have to give that money back at the end of the biennium. This is going to essentially ask for the funding that we haven't spent yet to be able to continue that work into the next biennium. And then back to the climate smart agriculture, we're going to have a presentation on this tomorrow to go into the true depths of what that application is. But this is the POP to receive that federal funds and whatever the federal funds that we get through that program. You will see an OR there. There is no OR in budget land, but for the purposes of this document, we put that OR statement in there to say we don't know what USDA will grant us. We don't know what that is, and so we'll probably have a parallel POP around kind of a state general fund ask there as well, but obviously much smaller scale than what the USDA ask is. So that's what that POP is. So I'll stop there before we finish up with market access for any questions.
All right, Barbara.
Barbara Boyer. So the lower Umatilla Basin ask, that 180,000, is that the original figure or is that marked down?
So the original figure was 250, which is what we contracted out for. The 180 is what we anticipate the cost of that contract to continue in the next biennium. What we wouldn't be able to spend out of that 250, right. So it's not an addition. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, finishing up with the market access and certification program, page 4. Expanding market opportunities. This one, to really look at kind of where our products are going to be going, how COVID really changed, how all the flow of commerce is moving. Really putting in 2 positions, 2 trade managers there for domestic market work and international work, with resources for them to do those trade missions and trade activities. The Agriculture Opportunity Grant, this one is a little bit of a development off of a package that came out of the governor's budget in 21, was $1 million ask for kind of BIPOC producer grants through the ODA. We've brought this one back to really focus, on those small historically underserved producers. Again, really complementing that grants office that would be helpful for that project. Farm to School infrastructure grants. We do have funding for this. It is in the Department of Education's budget that gets transferred to us. We're asking that it actually just gets wrapped up into our own budget. And so we don't have to do that transfer. FSMA funding, this is a straight continuation of federal funds and positions that we get already. Meat processing infrastructure grant, as Director Taylor mentioned, we have the $2 million ask in front of the June E-Board. We're also putting in a policy option package for additional funding in the next biennium. And then weights and measures, it's a placeholder. Basically, as Lauren mentioned, we have to have permission to spend money that we get off the fees. This would be to increase that limitation in the event of any fee increase. So that is the entire document in a high-level summary. Again, the budget process will continue on, as will the legislative concepts that we have forward. So with that, Chair Harper, I will take any questions from.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jonathan. Any questions?
Yeah, Ela Miller, I wasn't sure where to ask this, and it was related somewhat to hemp, that I thought there was some funding that the department had that helps support water, and I thought it was water quality, but and it may be better to answer that when you give the hemp update. But there was some flow, maybe it was a couple years ago.
You are remembering correctly. We, with the recognition, we were getting complaints around water, particularly in Southern Oregon. I I put together an intergovernmental agreement with Water Resources, so they had the resources to bring on a new water master that could be focused on cannabis. The last legislative session gave them, I think, seven new staff. And so we've been able to insert their new staff and pull back on that agreement. It acted as a great bridge, and frankly, from my perspective, did what I was hoping it would do, which was to help Water Resources show, well, look what we can do when we have an additional staff. And that wasn't the whole reason, but yes, we're not having to fund that anymore because they were able to get additional staff.
Thank you.
If there's no additional questions, which I don't see, I just wanted to mention one thing as a reminder. Well, as we go forward in this process, we do have an election this year, and we'll change governors. Just so you know, we have to be nimble enough in what we're doing because that new governor will have a chance to put their footprint on the state agency budget. And so we've tried to design this in a way that it could be pivoted or moved that way. It's not simple. I'd like it to be a little bit simpler, but just as a reminder, we're going to push our budget in for one governor, and then the next governor will be able to get a little more time to take a look at that budget, and it may change.
All right, any other questions? Our virtual members, any questions? All right, well, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Lauren. Next up, we have 4 speakers on farm worker housing programs and stakeholder perspectives. We have Molly Permine McGregor, Permine Farms, Aaron Robbie, Board of Directors, Columbia Gorge Fruit Growers, Renee Stapleton, Policy Manager, Oregon OSHA, Martin Jarvis, Program Manager, Oregon Housing and Community Services, and they will be all 4 joining remotely. Oh, yeah, sure. So first up, we'll have Molly Permine McGregor.
Good morning. You can hear me?
Yeah, Molly, we can hear you.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me this morning. I apologize I couldn't be there in person, but I have 45 middle school students coming at about 10:30 today for a Adopt a Farmer field trip. So staying busy. And ironically, we'll be out at our labor housing today with the kids talking about why we have it and what we do. And so I appreciate this opportunity to kind of get a warm up to them. So I was reading the resolution and I would like to continue, or ask that you continue to support farm labor housing and the resolution regarding the agricultural workforce housing tax credits. It's an important piece, and we will continue to support it ourselves. We have used it in 1996 when we added 6 new 800 square foot housing like apartment-like buildings for our cherry crew, and but at that time it was only 30%, not 50% tax credit, unfortunately. But my dad and uncle were able to utilize that credit. While it was helpful, it is also there's challenges posed with that because it only really allows for new construction and or substantial renovations. And while land use laws, while they're necessary and appropriate, and I appreciate them, also pose challenges for building new construction on farm labor housing. And Marion County makes it a little harder. So it is somewhat of a challenge to build new structures and to substantially rehabilitate the existing ones. Not sure what that means and what would be considered substantial. But again, we will continue to support it and use it as is available. What I'd like to encourage the board to consider promoting or including would be a need for a complementary tax credit for maintaining ag labor housing on farms. I think it was in 2019, I believe. There was a Senate bill to potentially include that in the ag workforce housing tax credit, and it unfortunately didn't pass. But we spend roughly, I was doing some quick math, about $2,500 annually on a low end in maintenance and repairs each spring, trying to get the labor housing ready for the cherry crew that comes up from California. And with the changes, what appears, it occurs to us as heavily regulated housing, for on-farm housing, there are changes often. And COVID, obviously, in 2020 presented the biggest challenge. We spent nearly $20,000 trying to meet the changes OSHA had put forth for COVID restrictions. And that's not money we necessarily, I guess, get back because our housing is all rent-free. Our crews do not pay to stay. It is part of, I guess, what helps bring them to us annually each year. Our crew is, most of them are 3-4 generations. So I've grown up with several of them that continue to return to pick cherries. And without it, we would not probably be able to continue to grow cherries the way that we do. We would have to replace that crop. So farm labor housing is extremely important. And I encourage you to see if you can help support some additional tax credit information with a maintenance portion. And I'm not sure if there's other things you guys would like to hear. I could talk forever about ag labor housing. I feel that it's really relevant and important to our farm, and without it, we would definitely be doing a lot of things different. We have actually started leasing out our housing in the fall for a hop harvest for our neighbors. They have for H2A because they are short housing and have an increased need in H2A workers. And because of the reduced housing availability, we're all working together to get creative to help support each other in those ways. So they've helped to cover additional costs regarding heat, and we now have to keep the labor housing at particular temperatures, which required a lot of air conditioners to be purchased. And unfortunately, 6 of our 12 units do not have enough power currently to them to be able to support an air conditioner in each of those units. So we will be working with PGE and our electrician this summer to spend a lot more money to get more power to those units. And mind you, we use these for maybe 12 to 16 weeks out of the year. And the rest of the time they sit and keep mice warm. So, but with that, if there's any questions, I don't want to take up all the time because I know there's some other speakers, but if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Molly. Are there any questions from members virtually or present here from Molly? Okay, I think we'll probably actually just reserve questions for the end. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you, Molly. Let's see. Next, we have Aaron Robbie, Board of Director for Columbia Gorge Fruit Growers.
Hi, good morning. I'm Erin Roby, representing Columbia Gorge Fruit Growers, Hood River and Wasco counties. And Columbia Gorge Fruit Growers membership in those 2 counties is pretty unique because we make up 2/3 of all the registered labor housing in the state of Oregon. So it's a big deal, labor housing for us in this area. Our area is also fairly cost prohibitive in terms of finding affordable housing. So on-farm housing in particular is critical for our labor force and for our growers. We have over 440 tree fruit growers in Hood River and Wasco counties, and we employ approximately 2,400 employees during peak season and 1,200 year-round. And I think that one thing that's important to consider about ag labor housing is that often it's not just housing the employee, it's also the employee's family. So on my farm in particular, I have 8 single family houses, and each of those houses has one employee, but the house also provides housing for that employee's family and sometimes extended family. And those family members have jobs at other locations throughout the community. So ag labor housing is really supporting a lot of families in our communities and also other businesses in the community. We have, a wife that works at a bank and an older son that works at a glass factory. So I think it's important to consider that perhaps the number of people living in ag labor housing is greater than just the workforce of our farms. We support and very much appreciate the Ag Workforce Housing Tax Credit. It's critical for us to provide good quality on-farm housing to attract highly skilled workers. With a reduction in workforce, as so many different sectors have seen, agriculture is no different. It's hard to find employees, and one very important way that we attract our highly skilled employees is by providing good quality on-farm housing. As Molly mentioned, that's provided rent-free and utility-free. And to add on to what Molly was saying about perhaps if in the future we could consider some maintenance funds in terms of the tax credit, another thought that we had, I think it was kicked around in 2019 or 2020, was to also include some sort of a credit for utilities. My utilities just for the ag labor housing is $25,000 to $30,000 a year. And again, we don't charge our employees back for those utilities. So that's a pretty significant cost for us. And of course, those utilities are supporting multiple families. We supported House Bill 2096 in the 2021 legislative session that was brought forward by Housing and Community Services, but unfortunately that increase in funding that would have brought the funding up to 24 million did not pass. So we're hoping that we can ask for an increase again during the 2023 legislative session. And I think just thinking about our area in particular, the Ag Workforce Housing Tax Credit lets us expand housing. So as housing becomes less affordable and there's less of it in our area, we're able to add units on using the tax credit. I agree with Molly, it is a little challenging to use the program. And so if there were, some asks in the future that ODA, if you're at the table, could make, trying to make that the process for actually accessing the tax credit a little easier for a grower who is everything in their operation. They're the person doing payroll, they're the HR manager, they're the one out there mowing the lawn. And then so to add that one more step and to have a little bit more support on how to access that tax credit would be very helpful. So again, we very much appreciate the tax credit. It helps us provide reliable and affordable housing for our employees, and that's how we attract employees in this valley, is by being able to provide that. I am a part of Oregon OSHA's current rulemaking process, looking at updating some of the rules. So another important piece of this tax credit availability is that when rules change, and if they do change substantially, that it may mean that we need to make changes to our ag labor housing. For example, there are ratios for showers to number of occupants or toilets to number of occupants. So if those things were to change, we may have to make significant changes to the structure of our housing. Maybe we need to add another shower or two or add more toilets in order to meet those new regulations. So that's another important use of the Ag Workforce Housing Tax Credit. So thank you very much, and I will stick around in case there are questions at the end.
Thank you, Aaron. Next, we have Renee Stapleton, Policy Manager, Oregon OSHA.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I first want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. My intention was to be in person, but I've had some challenges this week that had made that not possible. So my apologies for not being in the room with you. I was asked to talk a little bit about our program. So we're just going to run through a few little slides, but certainly available for any questions and follow-ups that might be requested. So go ahead. I'm currently the acting administrator. In my normal role, I'm the policy manager, but we're in a transition at this juncture. So I'm taking on this new role until we have a permanent administrator. So next slide, please. So the original request that I received was to talk about what our mission is in relationship to labor housing. And just taking a step back, the Occupational Safety and Health Act actually has a requirement to furnish a safe place of employment and all the elements that go with that. And one highlight that I put in yellow is just to focus on the fact that in the Act, it actually describes a place of employment to be labor camps. So labor camps is an interchangeable word with ag labor housing or farm labor housing, farm labor camps. They all mean the same kind of thing for us. So it is an obligation out of the Act for us to regulate labor housing. One other element is that provision was passed down from the Department of Labor on the federal level as a requirement of our occupational safety and health program. So to be able to have a state program, we need to have labor as an element to be considered as effective at. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, thank you. So Oregon OSHA has rules that regulate what is expected in the labor housing. And the rules apply, I've just summarized a couple of them. There's some other provisions that when it applies, but these are the most relevant ones in relationship to this discussion, is that any place where employees are brought in as a recruitment, as Ms. Robbie mentioned, it's one of the opportunities that growers have to provide quality housing and bring workers in. So the more that they can do to make the housing desirable, then they have more opportunities to get workers who are willing to do their activities. The second bullet is probably one of the more critical ones, that how we make a decision of whether or not the rules are related to the particular housing, is whether or not it is essentially a condition of employment. So if workers are living in the house and if they are no longer working for the employer, then that would, and they're still allowed to live there, then that would not be a condition of employment. But if they're only allowed to live there and their families live there, as long as they are connected to the employer, that would be a condition of employment. So then it would fall under the regulations that we have for labor housing. Next slide, please. So this is just a high level view of all the things that we regulate in relationship to labor housing. And so as you can see, there's an awful lot of things that the employer has responsibility towards. Most of these elements come from the Department of Labor's labor housing requirements, and we have to be as effective as to be considered a state plan. So a lot of the elements come directly from federal level and that have just been transferred to Oregon. We have made some modifications to make it more Oregon centric, but conceptually most everything is from the federal level. And you'll note that there are 3 bullet points that are in yellow that say if provided, because those 3 things are not actually required to be provided. There are certain provisions. If they're provided, they must meet the standard. So not all labor housing will have those 3 bullet points. And it's probably worth noting that we've got a couple of different kinds of workers here in Oregon, which makes a difference of how we regulate. When it comes to workers that are domestic and they are living in the housing, Oregon OSHA requires that the housing is registered one time unless there's significant modifications, and then we would go back out there and, or excuse me, not registered, but on-site consultation occurs one time unless there's significant modifications. Registration is required annually as long as it meets certain provisions, and there's a couple of exemptions, but most of our housing is going to fall under the registration because of the size or because of the number of people or the mix of people. So our housing, we have about 375 housing units, registered camps, and that is housing, in some cases, overall thousands of workers. So there is a lot of workers who are in labor housing. The other kind of workers that are here are our guest workers under the H-2A program, and that actually requires by the Department of Labor standards and Employment Department standards that they receive a consultation either by Oregon OSHA or Employment Department annually to be able to have workers. And they need to be 100% in compliance to get that certification and registration. Next slide. So just showing you a couple of varieties of housing. This is a pretty average housing unit. As you can see, there's a number of units that families are living in. And on the right-hand picture, there is a barbecue grill. That would be an example of somebody who is providing kitchen, because that would meet one of the standards of the kitchen. So when we talk about eating facilities, it may be a barbecue grill, it may be hot plates, it may be a variety of other things. So the requirements are intended to be flexible so employers can navigate their various situations. As Ms. Robbie said, there are times that there are only a couple of weeks that are being used, and sometimes labor housing is being used annually for the full year. So next slide. This is another example of a pretty common labor housing. It is a self-contained unit for the sleeping quarters, and then they would go to another location for their eating facilities if the employer provided it. And when it comes to H-2A workers, employers must provide eating facilities. So really the employer has to decide the kind of worker that they're going to have on site. Next slide. And I will just end this with kind of an overview of this is the other side of what happens. This is unregistered housing. This has kind of been an explosive market down in the South when it comes to cannabis employers. They bring in a lot of workers, they set up a lot of tents, and it is housing workers under the conditions of our rule without any kind of registration requirement or inspection process. And so this is probably the better of the really bad examples that we have been seeing. And it has been a situation that's really challenging to navigate because we inspect the locations that are registered. So the places that are not registered are not getting inspections, and we have to rely on other sources to get there. So this is just an example of the other part of the world that we're working through. Next slide. So I will also stick around if anyone has any questions or thoughts or a follow-up to anything I said. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Renee. See, next we have Martin Jarvis, Program Manager for Oregon Housing and Community Services.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Happy to talk to you about the program I run. It's called the Agriculture Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program. Essentially, this is a tax credit provided by the legislature to individuals and organizations who agree to build agricultural workforce housing. Essentially, the credit can be used to cover up to 50% of eligible costs, a dollar for dollar credit. We have an on-farm set aside, so if you are a grower, You can access the funds through that set aside and use the tax credit to help fund the construction or the maintenance or the rehabilitation or the acquisition of agriculture housing for your employees. The program has been around, I'd say, for about 25 years now. We recently got an increase in the amount of money available from the legislature in 2021. So now we have a biennial amount of credits, roughly $16.7 million worth of credits every 2 years. And of that, the on-farm set aside is 20% of that amount. So yearly, we have available to farmers and growers up to $1.7 million per year in available credits. Essentially, when I say eligible cost, that means every single cost associated with construction, building, rehabbing, except land acquisition. The credits cannot be used to purchase land, but that is basically the only line we draw as far as how the credits can be used. The application process is very straightforward. We have an application online, a Word document, and once you fill it out, it usually takes me about a week to look through it and approve it and get the credits out the door. I also brought 2 colleagues with me, Mitch Hanoush, who is a policy analyst at the agency, and Tim Mahern, who runs our ag worker housing facilitation team, in case you have any other questions about what OHCS is doing to help alleviate the housing crisis in rural Oregon. Thank you very much for letting us come. Very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Are there questions for a panel from the board, virtually or here in the room?
Elin Miller, I guess the first question, and maybe I misunderstood, earlier on I was hearing tax credits could not be used for maintenance, but then I just heard that it could be, and maybe it's a different fund. So could someone explain that to me? Is it allowed to be used for maintenance, or is it a function of not having enough money and you prioritize otherwise?
The ag worker housing tax credit you can apply for maintenance needs. They would need to be fairly extensive to justify the application fee, at least. But yes, we would happily pay for. We would happily give credits to a project that needed to, fix windows, fix doors, repaint, put in new insulation, fix flooring. Basically, any rehabilitation that goes along with maintaining the property.
This is Alexis Taylor. So I have a question. On the fact sheet you provided, it actually says routine maintenance expenses are not an eligible cost.
To the extent that the routine maintenance does not meet certain thresholds, it does not qualify. But like I said, any rehabilitation needs would be covered.
Elin Miller again, that might be interesting to explore that differential, given all the increased costs that are going into the housing. And Mr. Chair, I have another area question, and it's in regards to, I think what Renee was sharing, H2A versus other. Is there like a percentage of what's H2A versus other split of the 375 registered folks? And then I have a follow-on.
That's a great question. About a decade ago, we had 2 H2A employers. It has exploded in this last decade. So I think that we gain a whole lot new employers every year, and there is more employers who are operating under other people's camps. And so they're sharing, like Ms. Robbie had described. So I don't have a number, but we certainly can try and follow up with our data system but I would put our H2A process somewhere between 35 to 50% at this juncture. It's really significant. And employment department probably has better numbers because they're required to file whether it's H2A through them.
Great, thank you. And then the other follow-on question, Renee, for you, and it may help in the update on the hemp issue, especially when you said the Southern Oregon and we saw the unregistered. To what degree is OSHA involved in enforcement or those activities down there to be able to deal with that situation?
That is also a great question. We need to rely on our other resources to be able to help us navigate when we have places that we need to go visit. As I mentioned, we only have on our scheduling list those who are registered. So what we need to do is get community members and employees and fire departments and all different kinds of resources to help us navigate when we have unregistered housing. If you have a row of tents or sometimes less than tents, it's probably a pretty good indication that it's labor housing, and we'd like to know about it. We have been coordinating with local law enforcement, but as you can imagine, if they're illegal under our rules, they often are illegal under law enforcement rules too. So there's a lot of moving parts. And so we have been working with various task forces and trying to work through the illegal situations, whether it be the marijuana or just the labor housing, to try and get those employers who are taking advantage of workers and taking advantage of the situation. So we are also participating in the labor trafficking task force to try and move processes along and actually have concrete solutions for those employers who choose to take advantage of the scenarios.
Thank you.
This is Alexis Taylor. If I could expound on that a little bit. So obviously with the additional resources and the concentrated effort in Southern Oregon and under House Bill 3000, Operation Table Rock, which you'll hear a little bit more about later on, we were really prioritizing our coordinated effort with local law enforcement, with OLCC, with ODA, focused on legal and what was legal and what was not illegal, and what was not legal down in Southern Oregon. There is a OSHA inspector down in that region, and we work very closely as our inspectors, as law enforcement were on the ground. If they saw something that did not look right, they were sharing that with that local inspector. But again, we were really focused on differentiating and focusing on those illegal grows initially, because there are serious safety concerns from our staff perspective, and Oregon OSHA shared some of those safety concerns. So that was kind of that initial effort, but we were always documenting and sharing that. I know law enforcement did the same. And there are some other, issues that we had been focusing on, or knowing that we're going to be prioritizing around water rights, around water quality, all of those things.
This is a question specifically towards Aaron. You talked about kind of the process is hard and challenging to navigate. Can you kind of expound on that a little bit? Like what are your roadblocks that you're seeing, and how can we help with that a little bit?
Sure, thank you. So there are a couple of things. One thing I really wish I had pointed out initially that I'll take the opportunity to now is that, and Martin, please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding this tax credit is not refundable. Is that correct?
That is correct. It is not refundable.
So that's one of the actually largest challenges to producers who are not showing profit in tax years, is that to go through the process of accessing a tax credit that is not actually usable for the producer has been a challenge. And then the second part of that is, so if the project was a $10,000 project, so I'm using an example of a grower who recently added a laundry facility. It was about a $10,000 project, so their award would have been approximately $5,000 then, right, 50%. And then from that $5,000, they're eligible to deduct 20% of that $5,000 in each of the following tax years. So that's a $1,000 in this case, tax deduction in a tax year. And there are paperwork requirements for the next 10 years, I believe. And so for a grower who's already not profitable, to go through the process of maintaining this paperwork, filling this out to get a $1,000 tax credit for income that they didn't have is just, I don't know how else to say it. It's just kind of frustrating and a challenge for people to put that kind of effort in when there's not a significant benefit. Now, of course, if the project was a much more extensive project, like, you know, maybe they're adding a whole housing unit and it was a $100,000 project, those things are going to change for that grower. So I think it depends on, you know, what the grower is looking to do. I believe since when I first tried to use the tax credit, and I understand what Martin's saying, the terms have changed since then. There wasn't originally a set aside for the on-farm housing, and it was like a rat race at the beginning of the year, trying to compete with, you know, developers and nonprofits who had admin staff that were able to get all the paperwork done, and the growers just weren't able to compete at that time. So we certainly appreciate the set aside for on-farm housing. That has been extremely helpful. But I think it's the long-term kind of requirements that growers have and feeling like, is this worth it to me, depending on the amount of money that I'm putting into the project when I'm not making money to begin with.
Thank you. That helps a lot. And then this next question I kind of have, and then maybe this is an understanding that I just need a little more understanding on. From what I'm seeing on some comments and different things is that, you know, if a farmer owns a house, it's a house on the farm site, it's been there, but they do use it to provide housing for labor, it is not eligible, that it falls under the state landlord tenant law, and they are not eligible for those tax credits. Is that my understanding, and kind of, I guess, why is it that way?
I'm sorry, I missed that partly. They own a house off farm and use it to provide housing for their employees.
Yeah, either off farm or, you know, if it's a, you know, for my husband and I, we have a farm that has a house on it, and that is the house where we provide for our employees. And from what I understanding, that's not eligible for the tax credit. And I'm just kind of curious, am I understanding that correctly? And if so, why are those housing units not available or not eligible for the tax credit?
They are actually, they would be eligible currently under, we've sort of transitioned to thinking about the on-farm set-aside as an employer-provided housing set-aside. So we do allow farmers and growers to purchase or to fix up houses they own nearby and then use them for ag-worker housing. The only caveat is that we cannot pay for any of the land costs. So it would just be the structure that we would finance.
Any other questions? You're up, Barbara.
Barbara Boyer. Molly, are you still there? I don't see you on the screen.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Hi, Molly. Barbara Boyer.
Hi, Barbara.
So you had mentioned some of the tax credits, some of the work that you're doing right now on farm, that you're only allowed to take 30% tax credit instead of a 50%. Can you clarify that for me?
No, I apologize. No, when in 1996, when my dad and uncle built a new unit, it was 30% at the time. If we were to apply for those rehabilitation costs for this year, it would be 50%. So if we do that electrical work that will be substantial and some other things, then we'll probably be looking into taking advantage, hopefully, of it. So,
okay, thank you. And then a question for you, Martin. So you said that you had an increase to 60 million tax credits. What was the fee before that, or the figure?
Oh, yeah, is the increase to 16.7 million. It was slightly more confusingly written previously, but essentially what it was is we got a yearly amount roughly 7.25 million. And of that, we could hand out half of it as tax credits.
Okay, thank you. And then one more question for you, Martin. I think I heard the number, there's 325 registered workforce housing. Is that correct?
Oh, I believe that was Oregon OSHA's registered farm housing.
Okay.
And the number is 375.
375
is what we have right now.
Thank you. And so maybe you would not have this information, Martin, I'm curious what percentage of those farms actually take this tax credit?
Generally speaking, we get about 5 or 6 on-farm projects per year. And the amount of housing built runs the gamut from 1 unit of housing all the way up to 12 units. I think the amount of on-farm housing we've built in the last 20 years, 2,000 units roughly.
Excellent. So any other questions for our panel? Virtual participant members in person? All right. Yeah, so it's break time. It's actually scheduled for 10:15, so we're a little ahead. So would you like to just come back at 10:30 then, Alexis, or do you want to? Okay, so we'll break until 10:30. That way we kind of stay on schedule for folks virtually, and we have public comment starting then. So, yes, and if anybody would like to plan to speak for public comment, please sign up on the sign-up sheet or comment with your name and organization in the chat box. All right. Thank you.
So that money was appropriated last year during the special session. That was $2 million.
So infrastructure. So there's two separate ones. There's like the state level inspection program where we will go and do the state level inspections. And then there's the infrastructure grant, which helps facilities come to the USDA. So kind of work together, but separate. Does that help? Sure. Yeah.
So the one with all infrastructure grant, that's state money or is that yours? And what are the amounts?
So it was, yeah, it's $2 million.
Total?
For the infrastructure.
What about the state level?
But that's why he's the complainant on this side complaining. When she was talking, oh, I can see her.
So it's staff, so it wasn't necessarily.
Yeah, no,
It's an easy. No, so that was actually just during the last one. Yeah, so the authority. Regulatory inspection for a special section. And then it got wrapped up in the it's a confusing timeline.
What is this?
Anyway,
so
if you get a call from the legislator.
For the regulatory one, for the inspection one, the whole plan at under the USDA review, because they have to approve all state programs. Well, round one was feedback, continuation, and just subject. 2 years ago.
What kind of stuff is this?
You gotta show, so really, so USDA has their big so let's talk about that.
I'm just giving this example.
You gotta show staff and training, right? How to expect, you're gonna have.
I'm gonna play the microphone. It was great. I thought like you guys did organizing it.
That was fun. I know. But I think it's going good.
It's really USDA folks, just and then the state programs will do as equal to. So you gotta prove your ask it. So that's kind of what.
And I,
It's a huge, I should because a lot of regulations that we just have to put into Oregon. So that.
Wasn't invited. She wasn't going to be able to start meeting.
Yeah, and then we have to send our staff.
I had a good like stream. Yeah, from a lot of yeah. And I'm super sad that I didn't. Yeah. Other than it's good. It's, I mean, it's really nice that we're all learning.
Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll be on the next one. There's a few shorts.
And you guys expect something. And you already sent the stuff?
I don't think
Not a
it's
whole lot.
That's.
Yeah.
I was at one of my.
Very, very little.
And then, what's going on with
Yeah, so for facilities to be inspected, they have to be first. USDA standards. And so the infrastructure grant was to help facilities do the capital investments to meet those USDA standards.
And that's so they can be state inspected, but equivalent.
Yeah.
And that program, that'll allow you to do basically everything you can do with, you can ship out of state or you just.
No, so you're not going to state inspected, it's just insane. Retail, restaurants. This is
Okay.
because right now, right, you at a town. Customer lot, right, you have to sell like the whole cow. You can't sell by the pound. Which that is state inspected. Even if you had a USDA inspected, it's just really hard to get there. As a small operation. So like a pound.
And so where in the process are you at 2 million?
So, application process.
So technically,
February, March, so it's closed.
This February.
Yeah. We've got applications just
Yes.
you may have.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just well, that was the other weird thing, I was just saying, I felt like a little combo, because even though
in terms of rewards. I think both the program staff and the there's some relief to applications. There's a lot more applications than anticipated.
What do you think it is?
We've never done it before. We didn't really know what the demand was. I mean, we're tight. But yeah, no, it's, I mean, it was a good round. We even had some communication that folks didn't apply, but it's too like this. We may or may not be able to get it, so we're going to apply. So we know that there's even potential more demand out there.
Because they didn't think it was sufficient, or because they
Oh, no, I mean, a lot of people were excited for it.
And then, so when do you expect to get those? And does that have to happen, do you have to have the USDA approval?
That's terrible.
To negotiate. And then, I don't know when you walked in, but for the June.
I thought it was.
So that's for next year. So this is for, so June 30th.
That's for the.
So June 30th.
And then 5 million for the next regular,
which then, new application, all that, if we get additional that way.
That's for the 5 million.
Let's take that.
And why is it that you feel?
After 20 years.
For the interest, there's definitely got to be because of the traffic, have that redundancy.
So we kind of seeing during COVID that that's going to
also,
That's a good question, because I think
hundreds of miles, even out of state, just to be able to access.
So I think, yeah, it just lets the ways and means. Next time.
The intent to open, the intent to have.
If there is a next situation like that, it helps. Well, yeah.
So the idea is because of the interest you're seeing and there's a need that you're going to be asking for more. And then how are you going to be, because right, 2 million, that may not, that can go far for maybe one facility or two facilities, but if you split it up among the 44, then another effort and doesn't do a lot. So how is that?
Yeah, that's going to be a general review committee to decide which projects those funds to. And the criteria, I know I can't speak to the criteria, like the matrix on that would be a good choice.
And who's this?
Just one. What's here? He's our market access partner.
Matus, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
So he runs all of our.
Okay, can you point them out to me?
Yeah. And then Rusty would be able to. Rate for food safety.
That's what I want to ask you, so.
All right, thanks, Jason.
Well, that's the thing is I should start. It's not like we have like a secret workforce. Yeah.
I know that after 500,000, go through a matrix.
For all the money that they spent doing it, you don't want to. Just Stacy.
Yeah. Nice to see you. You guys want to yeah. Really?
I do like it here. Yeah, I do.
Never look back. Me too. But it was
Hey guys, if it seems too good to be true, if it's like, there's better.
There's better.
Yeah, there's something better. It's like, you know, I'm sorry. Well, I don't know.
Thank you. That
was great.
I feel like that's more soon now, like a lot of people are busy and like, yes. So they can decide it's not.
I know. Yeah. So are you like, okay. That's like a philosophy of like. So what do you do? Why are you here today? What do you want out of today?
I listened to this guy wrote to me a while back, and he had seen the women. Talked about like rural communities.
Let me see if I can get a hold of her. Yeah, it was fun. It was on Zoom. I was on Zoom. But they're like, I think so. Good job. So yeah, kind of first like urban Portland audience that I've like tested out with some messaging.
Seems like
Yes.
yeah, they call you when they have extra water. Otherwise, if you're not, they just tell you call and ask.
I was thinking that it was gonna be like in my calendar.
She's there. Yeah. She's on a couple days off. She's PM shift, so 3 level. Yeah. Yeah.
She came on and says the Oregon woman is bad.
Yeah, she actually was right on her. 5 days off. She was able to squeeze an extra day off. So she's here.
Yeah.
Extra shifts.
Is she like a better role?
Oh, where is she?
I know, but she's right there really good at estimates. I don't want her things are all that way.
Oh, I know.
We were telling Claire a bunch of stories from back when she started, and we're like, trust me, this is not like a normal experience.
Yeah.
Lost, I don't like that. I should have. Dave Dillon and Thomas workshops about alcohol and hurricane.
Oh, no.
And so he would have your beers and laces and got 2 hurricanes. Dave does not drink. And the sugar.
It'll be super. Don't leave me.
Yeah, and then
So confused.
All right, everyone, it's 10:30, so break is over. If we could come back for public comment, please.
Let me know, reach out if you need anything.
I will do so. Thank you. Yeah, she's coming. All right, so we're up for public comment now. We have 3 in-person speakers, and then we have 2 that are going to be virtual. And we're going to start with Stacy McLaughlin. I'm having trouble with the call-in portion of this virtual meeting, so she's going to speak over a phone into a microphone.
Hello. Stacy, welcome. You're on deck here.
I'm sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
Stacy, this is Board Chair Brian Harper. We're starting our public comment now, and we're going to put you up first since we're having problems with our virtual call-in.
Not a problem. If I didn't live in such a remote area with bad cell or internet service, I could try to get Microsoft Teams, but it's we're a little bit too slow for it to work effectively. Okay, so my comments are, Chair Harper and members of the board, good morning. I will not reiterate the information you have already been provided. I spoke yesterday with Deputy Director Henderson and Program Director Rusty Rock, who acknowledged the lapse in practice by the department. As I understood our discussion, my reading of ORS 607 is accurate. Certainly my complaint is irrelevant in the grand scheme of current events. However, accountability and responsibility, especially by the government entity charged with administration and enforcement of the law, is not irrelevant. When government makes it a practice to ignore little things, it becomes easier to ignore the more serious issues facing our communities. That is a treacherous path to travel and an even more perfidious path to accommodate. I have 3 points I believe are most important for this board to examine. Number 1, ORS 607 is a very one-sided statute in favor of irresponsible livestock owners. The full burden of responsibility lies with the person who is unfortunate enough to be affected with cattle unlawfully running at large on their property. As I read ORS 607.303, we are responsible for the animals for a minimum of 30 days and up to 45 days. And if the owner is not found, we then shall deliver the animal to the State Department of Agriculture at a place designated by the department. There is clearly an expectation that finders, if you will, are in the cattle business, that we can afford to feed and we are able to contain and then transport these animals. That is certainly not the case with us. We are tree farmers. This statute requires someone unprepared or unable to care for stray animals for up to 45 days. This ORS needs to be amended. Point 2. Further, there are no corrective provisions for either the department or local law enforcement in ORS 607 to penalize irresponsible owners from repeatedly allowing their livestock to run amok, other than to bear the cost of damages, which is clearly insufficient motivation to do the right thing. Point 3. ORS 607 allows for the Department of Agriculture to recover and collect its costs in administering the provisions of ORS 607 with violating livestock owners. As I understood my conversation yesterday, the department does not enforce that provision either, as the program is funded by the industry through another process. Arbitrarily enforcing the law is a clear violation of the public's trust and the department's responsibility to the people of Oregon. If you are not going to enforce it, then change it. However, being beholden to a funder is also a very treacherous path to traverse. And I guarantee you, in my experience, at some time, it will become problematic. Good government requires trust and confidence. So I remind you of your core values of honesty, integrity, and fairness, diversity, equity, and inclusion, respect for people and property, transparency, and especially quality customer service. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Do any members have any questions or comments for Stacy? Okay, well, we'll move on here. Carla, would you like to go to in-person now, or? No, it's okay. Okay, so we're going to go to Dave Losh with USDA, and I can't read that again. Yeah, Dave, you're up.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Dave Losh. I work as the Oregon State Statistician for USDA's National Ag Stat Service. Thanks for allowing me to speak this morning. I was going to just briefly outline our Census of Agriculture for those who are not familiar. It is a program we do every 5 years, and 2022 is our reference year, meaning that all the data that we'll capture from producers and then analyze and summarize will be for this current year. We've been busy building our lists of producers because we know people are always coming in business or going out of business on a daily basis for a lot of different reasons. We have made several mailings, some big mailings. The last was in February to people that we think may be farms, but we're trying to make sure that they are farmers before we send them a questionnaire. The end of this month is the last time that folks can really be assured they'll be on the list for the Census of Agriculture, because we are getting, it takes some work to get them on the list and make sure we've got everything in order. And just a couple dates I'd like to highlight is that we plan to send a postcard to kick off the Census of Agriculture in late November, particularly those people who have responded to our survey program before via our online web portal. So we're going to start with them and see if we can generate some early response and cut down on some of our costs. And then the rest will be mailed the questionnaire in December with follow-ups in February, and then it will continue through May next year. So we're gearing up for that, and I will hopefully make it to a board meeting. I apologize, I could not be there in person today. I intended to. I had a very lengthy jury duty service that just ended last night. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I do look forward to seeing the board in person.
Thank you, Dave. Are there any questions for Dave from the board, virtually or in person? Okay, so now we'll move to our in-person public comments. We have Taylor Sarman.
Good morning, Chair Harper. For your record, my name is Taylor Sarman. Happy to be here today on behalf of Friends of Family Farmers. As you may be aware, FOF's mission is to advance policies and programs that protect, promote, and sustain resilient and economically viable community agriculture systems in Oregon. FOF is happy to submit comments today in support of many of the proposals that were before you today in the Department of Ag's draft 2023-2025 agency request list. As you may know, as an organization, FOF has centered equity in the programmatic and policy work that we lead across Oregon, from supporting policies and initiatives from our BIPOC-led partners to embedding culturally specific technical assistance through FOF's FarmLink program. Social responsibility and equity continue to be the utmost importance to our organization and the farmers we serve. With this strong commitment in mind, we're very excited to see several of the items included in ODA's proposed policy option packages. FOF believes the inclusion of an agency equity officer, additional resources for diverse community engagement, and the agricultural opportunity grants to mitigate capital barriers would be vital investments to support BIPOC and underserved producers throughout the state. And we look forward and hope that those move forward through the process and look forward to being partners to support that work in the legislative process. Additionally, FOF was a strong advocate for the initial $2 million allocated to the meat processing grants, recognizing that the allocation was a vital first step in making Oregon a more resilient, food sovereign, and economically vibrant state by promoting family-scale farms and ranches. And with the overwhelmingly high number of funding requests that the agency has received, it's also clear to FOF that additional resources are needed, and we look forward to being strong partners and supporters of efforts in the legislature to increase funding and possibly expanding this program to include more types of processing facilities. I'd also note that we're excited for an additional potential $2 million to go through the e-board process and look forward to being partners on that request as well. Additionally, FOF wants to express strong support for the continuation of funding the ongoing conversations in the Lower Umatilla Basin GWMA between state agencies and local partners. And of course, we're excited to see the possibility of making permanent the soil health position as well in the agency's budget. So looking ahead to 2023 in the legislative session, we recognize we're still early on in the agency's legislative budget development and policy request timeline, but just want to note that we're really happy and hopeful for the inclusion of these policy option packages and look forward to being collaborative partners and strong supporters as this work moves forward. So thank you. I would be remiss to say that I'm a proud OSU alum, so even more happy to be here today in Corvallis, and go Beavs.
Thank you, Taylor. Questions or comments for Taylor? All right, next up is Marianne Cooper.
Okay. Well, really prepared. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. For the record, Marianne Cooper. I am the Vice President of Government and Legal Affairs for the Oregon Farm Bureau Federation. Very happy to be back in front of you. I think it's the first time in a couple of years I've been able to be in front of you in person, so I appreciate the opportunity. Also, we'll say I'm a proud Oregon State graduate, College of Ag Sciences, class of 2006. So very happy to be back here today as well. I wanted to comment primarily on the resolutions, but also some water quality items you're going to hear on the agenda later. We submitted a memo on the resolutions. I won't belabor too much that is in there other than to say I also listened to one of the group discussions last night. Would definitely support you all learning more about the coastal coho recovery and coastal coho plan, and especially the efforts of the agricultural community along the coast to protect and support and improve water quality for the benefit of coastal coho. We've done a lot of work. That species is very close to recovery, and I think it would be great if that could be recognized in the resolution. Also wanted to comment a little bit on the climate policy initiative. I know, and we noted in our comments, it was developed at the time that the legislature was considering cap and trade. And I know conversations have shifted somewhat. But with the governor's executive order on carbon, the natural and working lands proposal that came in front of the legislative body last session, and the ongoing work that's happening at the Oregon Department of Agriculture, we think that the principles in that resolution are still really important. The cost to producers is still a really important consideration in climate policy. It cannot just be about supporting investments on the land. We also have to watch what happens to producers on the cost side. But I certainly think it would be appropriate to add some language in support of the work that USDA is doing and the ODA is doing in supporting going after a climate smart grant with the $1 billion that USDA has allocated. And we were glad to submit a letter of support for that effort. Hope that hope that ODA gets that funding and that work happens on the ground. And so I certainly think a recognition of going after those kind of voluntary incentive-based grant programs would be very appropriate. We also noted, and you heard a lot today about farmworker housing, so I won't belabor it, but would love to see that policy expanded to include support for that kind of, whether you call it operations or maintenance or operations and maintenance, that portion that is not able to be, to have a tax credit attached to it now. I think that would really help folks as their margins become thinner, as the cost of labor increases and the burden of maintaining that housing becomes more significant. That is the only regulated form of housing available to farm workers. And we think it's really important that it is supported and maintained for the benefit of the farmers employing the workers, but also to have the workers have a safe and legal place to stay. And a lot of times when they don't have farm worker housing available, they're forced into offsite unregulated housing that may or may not be meeting the needs of the worker and the needs of the farmer and have an increased commuting costs associated with it. Finally, and I was not in the group that talked about this last night, although I know there was some discussion. We would love, and this is a resolutions comment, but also a comment on the agency's budget. We would love to see ODA do some of the FSMA actual implementation and enforcement work. I think when that initially was developed, I think there was a thought that, well, if it's USDA's program, USDA should come do it. We are finding from our producers, USDA does not understand Oregon agriculture as well as they could. And I think people are finding the enforcement feels a little punitive. And I think having that within ODA would really help to ensure that the enforcement is occurring in kind of ODA style, a reasonable way, an education first approach to enforcement. So we would really love to see ODA go after those dollars. I'll be very quick because I see my light going. You'll hear about the MOU. We're going to look forward to the opportunity to comment on that. Just want to make sure that as ODA looks at its budget, that they are looking toward kind of concurrent water quality requests with DEQ. DEQ's increasing their water quality requests. We would like ODA to do that as well. And I think that was all I had since I'm out of time. So thank you so much and would happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments for Mary Ann?
Ela Miller, question, Marianne, on the FSMA work and for USDA and what's going on, just in a nutshell, and I know we've had some discussions about this, but maybe not extensive, and maybe I don't recall. What are you really asking for there?
So, and I'll let Director Taylor maybe field what's happened in the past, but ODA initially had taken the position of, you know, if we don't get money from USDA to do enforcement, then USDA can do enforcement, and we won't take on that burden, which I think was the right response at the time. But I think we have just producers that are having real issues with USDA enforcement and the lack of an ODA nexus to that. ODA does the education and training, but isn't involved in the enforcement, is my understanding right now. I think producers really feel like if ODA was involved, that they would have better outcomes on the ground. So not that enforcement would be less, strenuous or that the rules wouldn't be getting enforced well, but rather somebody that knows Oregon agriculture, understands Oregon practices, can start with that education first approach to enforcement. I think that's what they're looking for. And I think that would involve ODA getting resources for that work, obviously. And we would prefer that come through general funds because, our folks cannot afford another fee burden right now. But I think it's just really important that ODA have a role in that enforcement work.
Thank you.
And just for clarification, it's actually FDA.
Sorry.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Apologies.
As a federal partner.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that my colleague Gail Greenman had come in front of you in 2021 with a related request.
Luisa Santamaria. I have a question about that. I think ODA has been doing a great job trying to do, and I have heard from, I'm connected with the Food Safety and Modernization and the On-Farm Readiness Review. They're trying to establish that program, and I have been in those things to prepare workers to do the job. And since FDA is coming to do the audits, everybody was scared about that, and I know. But I have here good, I don't know, maybe you have other source of information, but I heard they didn't have any problem with FDA actually. So it was a good experience, but that is what I hear. And that is the ODA is trying to do, is just giving that opportunity, the practice to be prepared for an audit from FDA. So I don't know. I think you have been covering very well that area here.
And I think
observation.
This might be helpful, and I'm not the expert in the food safety program. The concerns we're hearing are much more when there is not necessarily the general compliance inspections, but when there is an issue on a farm, a suspected issue, USD is coming in, shutting down the whole farm. We've had some small farms get put out of business by that. And I think that they'll call ODA, and ODA is like, that's not really, that's FDA's thing. That's not really our thing. And so I think that's the component of not so much the routine inspections, but rather when they're trying to trace back where an issue is arising from. Where we've had, and I know it was, I think something that Laura Masterson talked about a lot when she was on the board, a lot of small and medium-sized producers can't recover from that kind of whole farm quarantine that happens, where they'll lose an entire production season. And I think they feel that that's pretty punitive when there's not a lot of times strong evidence that the issue even originated on that farm. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's been what the issue is that we've seen.
And we'll have a whole presentation on this tomorrow, actually, so, yeah.
Thank you all.
All right, Katie Murray.
Hello, good morning. Katie Murray, Executive Director of Oregonians for Food and Shelter. Chair Harper, board members, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I guess this is where I should say, also proud OSU alum, former faculty member. We're all here and working on Oregon agriculture together. It's so nice to be here in person. I just wanted to offer comment from OFS on resolution number 301 relating to coexistence. This resolution really hits at the heart of what OFS is here to do. And we encourage your support for this resolution as drafted. We appreciate the acknowledgement that's included in here, that there's a variety of production methods, tools, and technologies, supporting Oregon agriculture. These are legally available, but also really necessary for expanding and, sustaining our food supply. We also appreciate the recognition of ODA's role in supporting our growers and choosing and using these technologies. Also, being stewards for best practices. And, we really just want to partner with you as we engage on communication issues, encouraging tolerance for this variety of methods. OFS has a large number of commodity group members. And given that, we really represent a very wide variety of growers and production methods. And so we encourage your adoption of this resolution. So thank you.
All right. Questions or comments for Katie? Okay. Nope. All righty. Well, on that one is our last public comment speaker. So we're going to move on to ODA Agricultural Water Quality Management Program and DEQ Memorandum Process Update. That'll be Isaac Stapleton and Margan Allen. Sorry.
All right, good morning, Chair Harper, members of the board. Isaac Stapleton for the record. I also have Margan Allen with me, which I will let you introduce yourself, and then later Jennifer Weigel with DEQ will come up when we're talking about the MOA process, and let her introduce herself at that time.
Okay. Chair Harper, Director Taylor, members of the board. My name is Margan Allen. I'm the Water Quality Program Manager. Happy to be with you here today to talk Ag Water Quality 101.
Right, next slide. All right, so today I'm going to give you all a high-level policy framework overview. Bear with me if I get it wrong, Margan, or maybe Jennifer can correct me as I work through this. And then Margan, like she said, she'll give more in the weeds, in-depth conversation about the program. We'll discuss the MOA that we are currently in the process of revising with DEQ between our two agencies, and then give you guys kind of a precursor on what you'll see this afternoon in our tour. Slide. You can go to the next one, Carla, as well. So this slide really is just showing the regulatory framework for water quality work within our state. So the Federal Clean Water Act is the responsibility of EPA. They delegate that work down to the states. And in Oregon, Oregon DEQ is the delegated authority for the Clean Water Act. And then DEQ from there further assigns management agencies for the respective work that would apply as appropriate. And so for the Department of Agriculture, that's the Ag Water Quality Program, which focuses on non-point source ag water quality pollution, and then our CAFO program, which is a point source program that regulates it through the permitting process. Next slide. So as the delegated agency, DEQ is responsible in the state for designating beneficial uses for water, setting the parameters for monitoring, and then the criteria for water quality standards in the state. Part of that work is identifying impaired waters, and that's referred to as the 303D list. And in identifying those impaired waters, they go through a process of developing and implementing total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs. I think throughout the presentation we'll just refer to it as TMDLs moving forward. And when they're implementing those, they're identifying what that issue is for that impaired water, developing whatever that load allocation would be, and then designating a responsible party for addressing those issues, and ultimately working to remove that designation for those impaired waters. Next slide. So the law can really be broken down to three basic principles. One, really don't pollute, don't place wastes where they are likely to discharge or enter waters, and don't discharge to violate those water quality standards. And those three basic principles apply to all waters of the state, which is more inclusive than the federal waters of the U.S. So in 1993, the legislature passed the legislation to make the Ag Water Quality Management Program. Sorry, let me back up. So in 93, they passed the Ag Water Quality Act, which a lot of people refer to as Senate Bill 1010. You'll hear people refer to it as that. That directed ODA to develop plans to prevent and control water pollution and soil erosion from ag operations in the state, and when necessary to develop rules to implement the program. And then in 1995, they further clarified ODA as the designated authority over ag water quality in the state. And I think since 1993, the program's really matured and evolved over time. Some of the things that we'll be talking about on the MOA side didn't have in place back in 1993, and we've really grown and progressed from there, from really a program that was a voluntary-based program with regulatory backstop through complaint process to a program that's more proactive in how we approach enforcement and regulation through like SIAs, which Margan will give you more information about. So I think from here, I'll pass it off to Margan to continue.
Sure. Margan Allen, and go ahead, Carla, please. Thank you. So how we actually implement all of that Isaac just described is we use a blend of approaches, of course, still that we are using a combination of voluntary and regulatory approaches throughout the state. What you see here on the graphic is our state, and the black lines are representing the 38 different water quality management areas across the state. And the different colors represent our staff out there, this is actually hot off the presses because today, this isn't even reflecting what's out there today. We are expanding and hiring new staff. So ultimately, right now, the gray and blue up in the northwest is just one person covering a huge area. The southern portion, which is light blue and orange, currently is just one person. Thank goodness. We will be adding a new regional water quality specialist, and that's what those colors represent, our individual regional water quality specialists. That person will be new to the Klamath area. And then we have 3 other folks that are in Eastern Oregon as well, represented by the green, yellow, and reddish colors across the state. Within each of those 38 areas that you see, those represent water quality area management plans. And those, I think, it's a distinctive quality that there is a local advisory committee in each of those 38 areas, which represents not only local farmers and ranchers for that agricultural perspective, but they also represent tribal interests, local community interests, university extension, you name it. There's a wide variety of folks that participate in these local advisory committees. So I think that's a nice flavor that comes through that process. A key thing to emphasize with the Ag Water Quality Program is much of it is delivered through partnerships. Soil and water conservation districts are absolutely a critical component of that. So I introduced myself as the Ag Water Quality Program Manager, but within that is the larger umbrella also that I manage the staff when I introduced Karen Stutzman earlier, that specializes in assisting and supporting all of the 45 soil and water conservation districts around the state. We actually have a statutory relationship that prioritizes that we will deliver the program through those local entities. So that is crucial. And they are but one of many other partners that we work with to deliver the program. And again, those districts are critical for technical assistance, planning and funding acquisition for local landowners to improve water quality. So I did mention, of course, we've emphasized the ag water quality area rules, and I'll touch on this a little bit more later, but we also have new regulatory authority as of 2019 to implement the agricultural drainage channel maintenance rules. It's a mouthful. So for those folks who are actually using stream channels as a drainage feature on their property, it's a way of finding that balance between continuing that important drainage function, particularly in Western Oregon, but also to protect the water quality and fish and wildlife habitat that they support. So, next slide, please. So to drive this point home, what you have here is, I laugh because our staff sometimes call this the refrigerator image. This is a graphic demonstration of the core concepts here, that while we rely on the ag water quality statutes and rules as the regulatory backstop for our program, really to get all the way to protecting water quality throughout the state, that it relies on the implementation of the area plan, which embraces both the regulatory and the voluntary approaches that are taken across, and there's an individual water quality management plan in every one of those 38 polygons of that previous map. Next slide, please. I've already mentioned this. This is again emphasizing that special relationship with the soil and water conservation districts that is in statute, that we have an expectation to use them to the maximum extent practicable to deliver our program. And as I mentioned before, that they provide all those functions. Down at the bottom, there's that phrase called scope of work funding. We do have this special relationship that we receive funds from OWEB that we then deliver to and administer to the soil and water conservation districts. And that's through that scope of work, we help deliver and guide our expectations for the implementation of the voluntary portion of the water quality program. Next slide, please. So Isaac had touched on this earlier, and there's more text here than we would get. That's for your later sort of reading, but I'm going to describe the evolution of the program in 3 general kinds of phases. So the first phase of the program, starting in '93 with the advent of Senate Bill 1010, really is the foundations of the program. We gained our authority, and then shortly after, in 1997, received funding to build that structure across the state of the ag area plans and rules, and the whole structure for technical assistance delivery through the districts. That later became the 38 area plans and rules. So that's the core and the foundation there. So next slide, please. So that previous slide, we were working on the business. Then for a period of time, I would say we're working in the business. Basically, we put the wheels on, now we're driving it down the road. So for a long time here from about 2004 to 2012 was really this heavy on the implementation, some refinements in there, but it was emphasizing that voluntary program implementation support, but it did feature that regulatory backstop. Next slide, please. So then we enter a third phase, which is more where we are today, which I would say this is a phase of a lot of adaptation to the program. So we're back, we're also working in the business, but I would say we're concurrently working on the business to continually adapt and refine that. This is the period of time when we added more strategic initiatives to the program, including the focus area initiative, which was the first one to come out in either, it was 12 or 13. And that was really working directly with the districts to have them focus on individual sub-basins, to focus on voluntary efforts and building relationships with landowners in a focused strategic fashion to improve water quality. Shortly after, there was also a desire and the need to add in more of a backstop component, and that came with the evolution of the strategic implementation areas. That is also a sub-basin approach throughout the state. But in this case, in a sense, you take the voluntary approach that the focus areas did, and now you add a regular presence where ODA is having an active regulatory component and looking to see if there are compliance issues. We use a progressive enforcement approach. The voluntary is first. At the last resort is when we would go to enforcement as the tool that we would use. Critical to that is our continued partnerships with OWEB, DEQ, and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We then went into improving the area plans themselves to seek greater consistency across the state instead of having 38 of these being completely different, finding that we would have improved delivery and reporting if we gained some consistency across those plans. Continuing to refine them into 2015 and through today, even continuing to add and refine measurable objectives. So you have a better sense of what it is we're trying to achieve and how we're doing at achieving those set objectives. Up until today, with the continued adaptation with the most recent area plan chapter template, which I'll touch on a little bit more in the next slide, As I mentioned, the new authority with Ag Channel Drainage Program coming in there. And then most recently with the Mercury TMDL implementation plan is that we're looking to have a deeper and tighter kind of integration between the area plan approach and implementation of total maximum daily loads, as Isaac described earlier, to address impaired waters across the state. And so hint there with your blob, look to this as one of the features that we would be looking to add into our memorandum that Isaac will cover in a little bit. Next slide, please. For these area plans, the most recent template to give you a little more detail. Again, the purpose of these is to identify agricultural water pollution control strategies. Is we alternate between years, bienniums, doing a full review and a light review. Because if you think about it, having 2 years to implement projects, that goes in a blink of the eye when you're on the ground trying to get funding, actually implement it. That's not much time. So that's why we alternate doing a full review where we actually set the objectives, check in 2 years later, then do a full review and a full look, really how did we do? So to give more time for those actions to happen on the ground. The content is, as I mentioned, those measurable objectives, and now getting more detail to align them with DEQ status and trend reports. Again, that context being TMDLs and the water quality standards, and most recently adding in information about soil health and also drinking water sources. And I mentioned before how important this is for the partner activities and helping to direct those. And that information comes to you folks in those reports to the Board of Agriculture. And this is all part, again, and our implementation for water quality for the memorandum, the MOA mentioned there. Next slide, please. So this is a lot to go over in a short period of time. So that's why I say a slightly closer look at our initiatives. Next slide, please. I had mentioned previously 2 of those initiatives, and what this graphic the map here shows is a demonstration of their current footprint across the state, with the different colors indicating the programs. Strategic implementation areas, as I mentioned, have that combined approach of both a voluntary portion where the Soil and Water Conservation District leads in conducting outreach and technical assistance to landowners, but there is a compliance portion where with a failure to fully implement the rules in a given sub based in first voluntary, if that doesn't work, then we would come through the compliance or regulatory response. And again, with the focus areas, the voluntary approach, specifically through the soil and water conservation districts. Next slide, please. This just gives you a taste. Focusing now, this is our most recent information for our compliance statewide in 2021. Both the how cases are initiated. You can see it's fairly kind of evenly distributed. There's agency referrals from folks like DEQ, ODFW, other agencies. And then there's 2 classes of ODA-based observations, things that we would just observe happenstance out in the field, and others that is through that SIA process I mentioned. And then finally, public complaints is the other portion. The most common issues we're dealing with are associated with riparian vegetation, sediment, and manure, but we also have some coming in for nutrients, other issues, and pesticides. Next slide, please. Again, this is our latest program, our Agricultural Drainage Channel Maintenance Program. It's a simplified regulatory process to clean channels while protecting aquatic resources. It's a carve out of Department of State Land Authority, their removal fill program. And this applies only to traditionally maintained channels that have had work that basically that it provided the function of drainage within the last 5 years, that are non-ESH, which means essential salmonid habitat, and channels that are dry at the time of work. So they need to be seasonally dry, not diverted dry. You can't just divert your stream and qualify. It has to be seasonally dry. Basically, ODA receives a notice as an alternative to a DSL removal fill permit. It is free. It has a shorter review period. And some of the requirements include, but not limited to expectations for streamside vegetation retention, timing of work, and equipment restrictions. Next slide, please. With that, I will hand it back to Isaac.
Thank you, Morgan. Jennifer, if you wanted to join us. So we have a few slides to provide an update to the board on the work that we are starting to engage in around the memorandum of agreement between ODA and DEQ. And I will let Jennifer introduce herself before we get started.
All right. Excuse me. Good morning, Director Taylor, Chair Harper, and board members. My name is Jennifer Weigel. I'm the Water Quality Administrator at the Department of Environmental Quality. So happy to be able to join Isaac and Morgan here this morning.
Slide. So just to provide some background where we're starting from on this MOA, back in 2012 is when we initiated our first agreement between the two agencies. That initial MOA was really to set the framework for how the two agencies would work and collaborate together around water quality issues that were under the Department of Agriculture as well as DEQ and where we cross. That MOA was then later reviewed in 2018, but no substantive changes were actually made at that time. Since then, I think like I mentioned earlier, the program has continued to mature and grow. So for example, in 2012, when that initial MOA was created, we hadn't even initiated the SAA process. So it's not reflected in the current MOA of how that works and how we partner together to get some of that work done. So I think there's definitely a need for us to engage in that. It's currently on a 5-year cycle for review, and so it's up for review now, and that's why we've started the process. Next slide. So we have a fairly ambitious timeline, I think, of our own admission. Partly, I think it's ambitious because we see the need for this process to be successful to include a clear and open process for public comment and stakeholder engagement. So the goal is to have the final draft ready for directors' signatures by the end of this calendar year. Part of that outreach at this point is obviously talking to you all, letting you know that this is happening through this public forum, as well as we've begun the process of informing our stakeholders at this point. Staff are currently working on a draft form that we will share out with stakeholders and ask for public comment on. That's the goal for that would be in August to share that out, get public comment back, and then make any appropriate revisions in October, and then move forward with the final MOA. I think hopefully we will provide some progress back to the board later in the summer as work continues, and so I guess I'll leave it up to the board how you would like to receive that, either through another report here or through our written reports, but that's the process there. Oh, I will also mention that you know, some of our stakeholder outreach includes like the tribal entities. We will be sending a letter to the tribes later this week, hopefully to ask for their engagement on this process as well. So we're trying to cast as wide a net to make sure people are aware of the process that is currently going on. And Jennifer, please jump in if you have anything to add. Next slide. So given we're early in the process, it's difficult to really provide you with specific language that's going to be in the new MOA. Staff are currently, as we speak, drafting this and working on that actual language. But I think it's important to talk about the things that we don't anticipate changing that are our main focuses of the MOA from before that we see carrying forward, and then talk about some of the things that we will continue to have more changes and further discussion on. So the shared purpose between ODA and DEQ, that's obviously not changing. I think some of our roles and responsibilities around state non-point source program, the TMDL development and implementation process, as well as the biennial review process that's currently our practice, those are staples, and I don't think that changes. Areas where I think we have more discussion to have and make changes and improve coordination on would be the TMDL implementation process for agriculture. So Margan alluded to the Mercury TMDL implementation for the Willamette area. That process is currently ongoing, and I think it's going quite well, and I think it serves as a good model and framework to include in the MOA, so we'll be looking at that. Adding additional coordination around compliance and enforcement. Like I said, the SIAs will get included now, and that process will get spelled out so it's clear, as well as clarifying framework for monitoring and continued improvement and adaptive growth of our processes over time. As I said, the program continues to mature and grow. So we'll pause there for any questions on the MOA and let Jennifer add anything if you had additional comments.
I appreciate Isaac's overview. I think that's a good description of where we're at. One thing I will also acknowledge is Isaac and Margan have both talked a lot about how the Department of Agriculture's programs have changed over time. The same is true for the Department of Environmental Quality and carrying out the Federal Clean Water Act and developing TMDLs, establishing water quality standards. That similarly has seen an evolution over the last 10 years. There's an increased need for DEQ when we look at TMDL implementation and working with departments of agriculture, departments of forestry, and also local jurisdictions and various entities that have some responsibility for us to be able to articulate more clearly how implementation will occur. That's frequently referred to as reasonable assurance. So when we do a TMDL, we say, well, here's the pollution budget, here's the pieces of the pie, here's what needs to get reduced to improve water quality by the various sectors, and then EPA's oversight question and one of their markers for saying whether or not what we're doing is adequate and sufficient under federal laws to say, how will this be done? How can you demonstrate, or how can you either through various authorities' ability to enact laws or various authorities' abilities to support voluntary implementation through financing, being able to demonstrate that has a reasonable likelihood of occurring through their programs. And so that's just an aspect of our program that has stepped up in terms of the oversight DEQ receives from federal EPA. And so those are the kinds of conversations, and one of the contemporary examples being the work that we're doing with ODA on the Willamette Mercury TMDL, and talking about how can that be implemented? How do we leverage and work within ODA's programs so that collectively we can make this demonstration through both demonstrations we need to make, but also through the programs that ODA administers.
So yeah, I think we'll pause for questions on either the MOA or the program as a whole before we give you kind of the highlights for the afternoon tour.
Elin Miller, a question I have, if we look at all the various resources available, and I was hearing, certainly between DEQ and the delegation and all that, but how is USDA tapped into either FSA or NRCS resources to look at from a voluntary program standpoint in particular? And so the priorities, when you look at the focus you need, the federal dollars are also going to the priorities that need to be established.
Sure. Chair Harper, Director Taylor, Member Miller. I'm still learning everybody's names here. Margan Allen. I would say that is how that is all coming together is through the area plans. And the area plans through their local advisory committees are setting up those strategies and the objectives they want to achieve. And that local lead through the Soil and Water Conservation District is implementing. And they are also tapping into, can they apply for NRCS funds? Are there special programs with FSA? Or they're very creative. You know, if districts are masters at finding resources, that is one of their core expertise. OSU Extension, it plays a critical role in, they sometimes are members on the advisory committee themselves, or simply in the past, we have tapped OSU Extension for help even with compliance cases, asking, is this recommended action reasonable in this circumstance? So all of those local partners are, you know, it's the alphabet soup of local partners that they are seeking and tapping into. And that's what's nice about having such a not large number of locally committed groups and focused on local solutions. I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Chair, I just have a follow-up, and you may want to jump in, Alexis. Go ahead.
I just wanted to expand on that really quickly. So one of the things also when we do our strategic implementation areas, so we do an assessment. So we've picked a small watershed with a heavy ag influence, and then we also layer partner agency priority. So whether it be a water quality, fish habitat, those types of things. So it's kind of like a big funnel, and we get down to our priority areas. We do an assessment of all of the land in that, what we call then an SIA. And any land that we find as a potential for concern, the reason why we have this education first model, because we want people in compliance, right? We could go in and be, you know, civil penalty first, but that doesn't actually bring someone in compliance, and that doesn't equal water quality. So and another benefit to our education first model in this program is it allows them then, so we have an area, maybe it's a concern, we also then partner with the SWCDs, watershed councils, and then some of those federal OWEB and federal resources. If we were in a regulatory stance, that landowner could not tap into those NRCS resources. So that's part of the reason our program is structured this way. Then we bring in the local NRCS office and say, okay, this is the issue, this is the area of the thing that we're seeing as concerning. Are there resources here that they could apply for? And so that's part of that conversation in that SIA conversation that we have in areas all over the state.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think the only Elam Miller again, the only follow-up I would have to that is, do the local entities really fully understand the resources? And I think back to the beginning of CAFO, way back when, and it was recognized at a national level that resources and refocus had to be done, which legislation partially, but also from a policy basis to make sure that EPA at the time and USDA at the time were working together toward the same goals to then help the states and the other delegated authorities and tapping into the OWEB thing and all of that, depending upon the state you're in. And that's just what I'm worried about is, do the local entities really understand what can be done to help so we can keep advancing the cause?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great additional question. One of the things we do when we do our SIA process after our initial evaluation, we host what we call as an open house, where we invite all those landowners, that's funding partners are part of it, so we can kind of link up where like one-on-one where we maybe think there could be a property that might not be in compliance. There's, you know, follow-up on the ground visits that go along with that, and what type of resources might be there. I think there's probably always a opportunity to improve our communication, make sure the right funding partners are involved in those conversations. So I think we can always do more in that space, and probably certainly when we're outside of the SIA process, I think it's pretty focused within that process. But with some of the work that we do with the focus areas, with the SWCDs, I think there's certainly something we're thinking about and trying to make sure we're helping support some of those needed connections with funding and the on the ground work that we want to do.
Mark-Ann Allen, I would add as well, Chair Harper, Director Taylor, Member Miller, that there's specific, Ocean is made up, is a professional organization of the Oregon Soil and Water Conservation Districts that focuses on a yearly educational event to the districts, which is very well attended, and they always focus on doing that refresh on the latest and greatest as far as where funding sources and things like that. I would also call out OACD, the Association of Conservation Districts. It has a similar mission to making sure that their districts are successful and again are aware of the latest and greatest.
Thank you.
Barbara Boyer, just to tag on Elin, at the commission level, the Soil Water Conservation Commission level, we often say that SWCDs are Oregon's best kept secret because we're not out there flying that flag high. So we do discuss that at the commission level on how to get the word out a little more on that topic. But I have a couple of questions for the panel. So on the screen, you talk about compliance and enforcement coordination. Can you give me an example of what one of those would be on this new MOA?
Are you asking, sorry, Chair Harper, Director Taylor, Member Boyer, are you asking for the compliance process?
Well, it says possible changes on the screen, adding compliance and enforcement coordination.
The previous MOA simply, it didn't have a section at all relating to compliance. So we felt that it would be remiss to not add that in. It wouldn't be, well, I mean, we don't know what the final product will be, but for due diligence, we felt it was important to have that included as a segment.
And I echo that, so thank you. And then one last recommendation, you had mentioned tribes, the various commissions and boards that I sit on in the state. You often don't get response from tribes because there are so many requests that sometimes they just go to the bottom. So recommendation is maybe keep reaching out, not just a one-time ask, just maybe keep. Thank you. Keep that.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments for our panel on the board? Yep.
Eric Orm. Looking at the compliance charts, it looks like nutrients and pesticides are compliance cases or issues have been really low. Do you feel that to the panel, do you feel that is in relation to the push on through EQIP grants and CSP, there was such a drive on the farm ag side and there wasn't as many on the pasture or animal side, where I'm seeing, raised issues in manure and riparian zones. And so do you think you'll see more of a push or some more incentive for voluntary on the animal livestock side?
Chair Harper, Director Taylor, Member Orem. I would say that a lot of that has to do with the various swim lanes of our regulatory authorities. We have a specific pesticides program, and the vast majority of cases fall within that segment of our authority, and so are implemented through just another ODA regulatory authority. Similarly, the nutrients, a lot of nutrient management is addressed through, at least with animals and manure, through the CAFO program as a permitted activity. So that's another regulatory body. And it's sort of, if you think about the agricultural water quality program, there's a pesticides program, there's a CAFO program, and then
we catch what is missed after that, in a sense. So when we, for example, are in this, the strategic implementation area effort, or SIAs, we would be specifically looking for operations outside of CAFOs that look like they are having a manure management problem. For example, if they have a large accumulation, that we would identify those and approach either we would approach the landowner, or the Soil and Water Conservation District would approach the landowner and say, hey, we see you have a lot of manure. We have options for you. So that's the most common types of manure issues. We do have nutrients are challenging. The most recent example I would say is that we had a complaint come in about concerns about brewery waste applications. I think that's one of the hardest words in the English language. And how we approach those is we'd be doing an analysis of how much they are applying, how much and how that fits with the crop that they're growing, and it's understanding the uptake and the frequency of those applications, and basically deciding how likely, well, that, and as well as how close is groundwater to the surface as well, as a risk assessment. And then if it's likely, if we're concerned that there's likely escape, or in that case it'd be, that's where the waste comes in. When something escapes the root zone and gets to groundwater, that's an example of how a nutrient issue would work. Or another example is we did have a complaint at a tile drain where somebody was observing algal blooms downstream of a tile drain. So similar approach is that we tried our best to identify what a watershed would be for what was draining to that tile drain, and then having a similar discussion with those landowners about their nutrient management practices.
Building on that a little bit, and Margan, please correct me if I forgot anything, but the Ag Water Quality Program is really focused on a couple things, and it's around stream bank stability, sediment control, shade. Did I miss one?
That's Director Taylor. That's correct, Margan. Yes, that is correct. That is our bread and butter. Is truly it is mostly focused on surface water concerns, and it is mostly focused on riparian areas and all those functions for shade and prevention of runoff that they provide, and trying to keep soil in place so it doesn't get into creeks, and manure management. Yes.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Excellent.
If there's no additional comments, we'll jump to the field trip and give you guys a preview of what you'll see this afternoon. And Margan will walk us through that.
Chair Harper, Director Taylor, members of the board, Margan Allen. Just as a very brief background, I will walk you through this. And I do want to mention that we have Derek Godwin with us today in the audience, who will be is one of the lead investigators and is leading us on this tour. We'll meet Dr. Ochoa, Carlos Ochoa, out on site. He is teaching this morning. But very briefly, the origins with this research came in the 16-17 legislature. There were other research efforts going on around the state having to do with agriculture and water quality, but there was none representing one of our biggest agricultural areas here in the Willamette Valley. So really this stood out as a gap in the research that was ongoing. Hence the desire to have funding. And so that's the origins there, with the OSU funding coming in 16-17 legislature. Again, looking at, and this was a stakeholder priority. It was recognized by folks like Farm Bureau and many others that this was very much a need. So in that same time period, a draft study plan was developed and the funding was allocated. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, those are the folks we're going to be meeting with today, Dr. Ochoa and Derek. And what we're going to be looking at is agricultural water quality issues and quantity issues across a range of valley agricultural operations. And where that's going to be is on OSU campus vicinity and on campus, with Oak Creek being the focus, though keeping in mind that that's not the only watershed in this study, but I really will leave it up to Derek and Dr. Ochoa to give you more of the details today. So I will leave it with that.
I don't think we could have had better weather for today's tour. I mean, it's not Monday.
Well, excellent. I guess on that point, it's time for lunch. We have lunches for members and staff. Otherwise, I guess if you're not member of staff, you'll have to find your own food, I guess. But yeah, we'll congregate in the lobby at 12:30, and then we'll carpool. Yeah, to the location. Oh, yeah. Hey, Chad. Didn't know if you had a question, comment. We're going to be starting lunch here, and then before we go on our tour.
Yeah, not beyond just apologizing for not being in there in person. I was really looking forward to it, but circumstances outside time made it work. So this particular time, so guys have fun today. Go to the sunshine while you can.
Yeah, yeah. Same to you, Chad.
Thanks for joining, Chad. We appreciate it.
Yeah. See you tomorrow.
See ya.